From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ollie. Barrett Carrie Lam, in Hong Kong. How you doing? It's Tuesday's programme. It's September 3rd, 2019. I'm Richie Allen. I like to give you the old weather in Salford. It's overcast, but it's kind of humid this afternoon. Temperature's now around about 19 degrees Celsius. This is your Richie Allen Show. I look forward to hearing from you. You can tweet the programme right now by tweeting at Richie Allen Show and telling me what you think.
Richie Allen.
That's me.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, the outstanding Jill Henderson returns to this programme in the second hour. And there's a lot to talk about with Jill. And I'll tell you all about Jill before we bring her on, in case you haven't come across her before. We'll be talking about 5G. We're going to come at it from a different angle. What can we do about it? Because it seems inevitable. It's out there. It's happening. What can we do about it? What practical measures can we take? But we'll talk about other things as well. Libido, male and female, what's happening to it? And lots more besides the wonderful Jill Henderson. Before that, the Conservative commentator and author Mark Collett joins the programme. Mark will be on with me this hour in around about 20 minutes' time. We'll obviously be chatting about the Brexit madness. The Brexit shit show, I think we can call it. Mark Collett joins us live in around about 22 minutes' time. Looking forward to catching up with him as well. Yeah, and I want to say hi to Sean. How you doing, Sean? Sean's family are from Donegal. I met Sean a few weeks ago in Buell Hill Car Park, and he's a listener to the programme. And he stopped me this morning. I was on my run. He was on his bike, and he stopped me for a chat. It was nice to meet up with him. And how you, Sean? You might be listening to this now. Something I said tickled him the other day during one of the monologues. And he happened to be in a gym, and he happened to be lifting a barbell or a dumbbell, and it didn't go too well. I'm glad that somebody finds me funny. Not very many people find me funny. I find myself funny. I crack myself up, but not too many other people. Now, Conservative MP Philip Lee has defected, the treacherous bastard, to the Liberal Democrats. He walked to the Lib Dem seats as Boris Johnson took to the dispatch box this afternoon, left the Conservative Party on television and went to sit with the Liberal Democrats. That means that the government, Boris Johnson's government, no longer has a working majority in the House of Commons. This is a crazy day. It's a crazy day. Lee is the MP for Bracknell. He took his seat on the opposition benches just as Boris Johnson began to address the Commons. What did he say? Well, Lee said the government was pursuing a damaging Brexit in unprincipled ways, putting lives and, livelihoods at risk as well.
What kind of fuckery is this?
Well, I'll tell you, Amy, the fuckery is there's no majority for Boris Johnson. 'Tis mad. Beautifully written theatre. And theatre scripted in broad strokes, mind. Broad strokes. Not every detail is scripted to the crossing the T's and dotting the I's. There must be some improvisation. There must be some spontaneity. Not all the pawns are aware that they're pawns, you see. You know you're a pawn. I know I'm a pawn. I can hear you now shouting at your phone, your tablet, your laptop. I'm not a pawn, Richie. We're all pawns. We're aware of it. Many politicians, many journalists are not aware of it. They need to believe that they are acting independently and not being pushed around the chessboard by the shadowy figures and banksters who control the game. So they're not all in on it. That's why it erupts in this manner. It's scripted, but not down to the last detail. Anyway, Boris Johnson took to the dispatch box to speak for the first time after the summer recess and to update the House on what happened at the G7 meeting. It wasn't long before hilarity and uproar reigned.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I'm sure that the whole House will join me in remembering that it is 80 years today that this country entered the Second World War.
Yeah.
It is, of course, true that the horror of that conflict surpasses all modern controversies. It's also true that this country still stands, then as now, for democracy, for the rule of law, for the fight against racial and religious hatred. And, Mr. Speaker, I know that this whole House is united in defending those values around the world. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'll make a statement about the G7 summit in Biarritz.
Yeah, and he went on to make a statement about the G7 summit in Biarritz. There was cat calls, as he said, taking on the Nazis to fight for the rule of law. The opposition bench is screaming at him that, in their opinion, he's rejecting the rule of law by proroguing Parliament and trying to leave the European Union without a deal. Anyway, a couple of more sound bites from Johnson before we hear from Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, on doing a trade deal with the US and whether or not the National Health Service is up for grabs. What did Johnson say?
We could achieve even more in our trade with the United States by using the powers we will regain to do a comprehensive free trade deal, a deal in which both President Trump and I have agreed that the NHS is not on the table.
Yeah.
And unlike...
Do you believe him, by the way, the NHS not being on the table? Do you believe him? Serial lawyer, Boris Johnson. Do you believe him? Anyway, we'll park the NHS for another day.
Unlike some in the House, I consider the United States to be a natural ally.
What?
And a force for good in the world. And I recoil from the visceral, juvenile anti-Americanism that would do such profound damage to this country's interests. Mr. Speaker.
The United States is a force for good in the world?
What kind of fuckery are you?
Hey, sure it is, yeah. Yeah, it starves or murders millions of people a year, the United States, the great Satan. But it's a good force, or a force for good. Here's a laugh. After saying that he's told the European Union that the backstop has to go, Johnson said this: we are negotiating, there's a good chance we'll get a deal. I've told them the backstop has to go, and I've told them that a free trade deal is prerequisite going forward. Johnson said this, and, well, hilarity and silliness ensues, but it's quite funny as well.
In the last few weeks, I believe the chances of a deal have risen. This week we are intensifying the pace of meetings in Brussels. Our European friends can see that we want an agreement, and they're beginning to reflect that reality in their response. President Macron said, I quote, if, Mr. Speaker, they don't want to hear the words of our counterparts across the channel.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear about any progress that we might be making. They don't. Mr. Speaker.
They don't.
Order. I want to hear everything said in the order.
This is where it gets funny. Listen carefully.
Order.
He's mumbling.
Well, I've never had any difficulty hearing the Prime Minister, but if it is necessary for him to speak up, I am certain... Order! I'm certain that he'll overcome his natural shyness in order to do so. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think they're willfully closing their ears to the reality that our friends and partners are increasingly seeing the possibilities of an agreement. I quote President Macron of France. If there are things, he said, which as part of what was negotiated by Michel Barnier can be adapted and are in keeping with the two objectives that I've mentioned, stability in Ireland, which we all support, and the integrity of the single market, we should identify them in the coming months. Is that the negative spirit of the opposition benches?
No. Yeah, I told you it's theatre. I know you didn't need to be told that, but the detail that I've gone into in the past describing what this really is, I think it's becoming more apparent even to those who thought I was crazy when I was talking about this and writing about it, what it really is. So he was mumbling. So opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, he was a bit miffed at the choice of language used by Boris Johnson in the last couple of days, because Johnson described Jeremy Corbyn's attempt to take control of the business of the House and delay Brexit again as a surrender bill. He accused Corbyn of going for the surrender bill, and Jeremy Corbyn, when he took to his feet, well, he wasn't too thrilled about that.
The attack on our democracy in order to force through a disastrous no-deal Brexit is unprecedented, anti-democratic and unconstitutional. Labour will do all we can to protect our industry protect our democracy, protect our people against this dangerous and reckless government.
Yeah.
I condemn the rhetoric the Prime Minister used when he talked about a surrender bill. I hope he will reflect on his use of language. I really do hope he will reflect on his use of language. We're not surrendering because we're at war with Europe. They are surely our partners. If anything, it is a no-deal exit.
Our friends, said Emily Thornberry. Our friends.
Exit that would mean surrendering our industry, our jobs, surrendering our standards and protections in a trade deal with Donald Trump and the United States.
Corbyn is rubbish, isn't he? The European Union has destroyed manufacturing, it's destroyed jobs, it's destroyed competition. It's dreadful nonsense. But anyway, Boris Johnson wanted to remind the House and the wider watching public on television that Jeremy Corbyn, well, forever and a day, historically, has been as anti-European Union as it is possible to be. Boris Johnson.
Let us be in no doubt. This is a Bennite, a former Bennite opposite. I mean, he still is a Bennite, I believe. He is a man who voted against every single piece of EU legislation. He voted against Maastricht. He voted against Lisbon time and time again. He has said that we must uphold the result of the EU referendum. Time and time again he has said that he's on the side of democracy and vindicating the will of the people. And what do we see now, Mr. Speaker? He has been converted. He has been converted with his hordes of momentum activists trying to take over the streets, converted into the agent of those who would subvert democracy and overturn the will of the people.
There you are. Mad day. Mad day. If you heard yesterday's programme, you'd have heard Jacob Rees-Mogg tell Dr. David Nicholl that he should be ashamed of himself for fear-mongering. This was on LBC Radio. Rees-Mogg was doing a phone-in programme with the host, a guy called Ferrari. And David Nicholl the doctor phoned in to ask Jacob Rees-Mogg how many deaths would he accept in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Jacob Rees-Mogg said it was disgraceful. Said the doctor should be ashamed of himself. David Nicholl contributed to Operation Yellowhammer, which looked at the effects of a no-deal Brexit. Not to be deterred from the tongue-lashing that he received from Jacob Rees-Mogg. Not to be deterred, Dr. David Nicholl went on the BBC This Morning and Victoria Derbyshire's programme, and he talked about body bags. He's learnt nothing from the Rees-Mogg tongue-lashing. He talked about body bags. He says there are body bags on order because of the amount of people who are going to die as a direct result of leaving the European Union with no deal. Body bags. This is Victoria Derbyshire's programme, BBC, Dr. David Nicholl, on the body bags, be Jesus.
And we haven't even talked about the body bags.
Well, remind our audience about the body bags then.
That basically they've stockpiling body bags for the risk of an increased mortality rate and no deal Brexit, which is why I think those people that support no deal Brexit need to be aware what level of harm are they willing to accept.
Hang on, Martin Vickers. Why is your government stockpiling body bags?
Well, I'm not aware that they are. But
if they are, why do you think they are?
Well, I've no idea because it's like Dr. Nicholl. I mean,
there's only one reason. If that's true, there's only one reason.
On what basis do you fear more deaths?
Where's
the evidence?
Plenty of evidence. Okay.
You're saying.
You've asked the question, so respond.
Tell me, you're asking me where is the evidence and so on.
Of course, it's a fair question. I was dealing with epilepsy, so epilepsy is a life-threatening condition. Those were reds, okay? Neuropathic pain.
Epilepsy is reds. He was asked for evidence by the Tory. The Tory said, give us evidence that we need body bags. And he says bizarrely, listen to him, it's bizarre stuff. He says epilepsy is reds. I think he's talking about a colour-coded danger chart here.
I was dealing with epilepsy, so epilepsy is a life-threatening condition. Those were reds, okay?
Those are reds? What does that mean?
Okay. Neuropathic pain.
Neuropathic pain, right?
Are listed as amber, okay?
Are listed as amber? What the fuck?
Okay. Now, if you've got neuropathic pain, you may think, well, actually, that's going to cause me a certain degree of disruption. And I think a lot of people will be quite distressed on that. But you're trying to make a choice between life-threatening and morbidity, okay? And ultimately, I'm having to make a choice of, people aren't going to die.
Why doesn't Victoria Derbyshire jump in and say, as the host, and say, Dr. Nicholl, with great respect, that is horse shit. Excuse me. That is undiluted horse manure there. Answer the question, why do you think people are going to die if we leave with no deal?
Aren't going to die, but they are going to suffer, which is a really uncomfortable ethical position to be in.
Why do you think that if Paul, Dan and...
Epilepsy, that's reds. Neuropathic pain, that's amber. That's crap, isn't it? This is the guy who was told by Jacob Rees-Mogg, who I'm no fan of course, that he should be ashamed of himself for fear-mongering on LBC yesterday. It's coming up for 19 minutes past the hour. This is the Richie Allen Show. There's none like it. Live on Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv, my own website, richieallen.co.uk, and tune in radio as well. So later on this evening, do you want to hear about how it's going to go? Do you? How it's going to go? Tonight, members of Parliament will try to take control of the parliamentary schedule. They will do that because there will be a vote on it. If they do that, they will do so through a vote tonight at around 10 o'clock. There will be a debate before that vote. Remainers need some Tory MPs to vote with them, and they might very well have the numbers. They might do. Conservative members of Parliament have been warned they'll have the whip withdrawn and they will be deselected if they rebel. I don't know if there's any real truth in that, but that's been flying around for the last 48 hours. Boris Johnson's people have been telling backbench Conservative MPs, if you vote with the opposition, you will have the whip withdrawn, meaning you won't be sitting as a Conservative MP, and you'll be deselected. You won't be allowed to stand for the Conservative Party at the next general election. So if the Remainers win tonight and take control of the business of the House, they would then start trying to pass a new law, a law that would make the government ask the European Union to delay Brexit until the end of January next year. That would be debated and voted on in the Commons on Wednesday and moved to the Lords on Thursday. That's tomorrow and this coming Thursday. That's how it's going. And it made me laugh today. Sir Nicholas Soames, Sir, if you please, Nicholas Soames, the rotund Nicholas Soames, interesting guy. Winston Churchill's grandson is an ardent Remainer, and he's one of the Tory rebels I just mentioned. And he's been an MP since 1983, because it's an old boys club, you see. Alright, there's no democracy. Career politicians, he's been 36 years, this arsehole has been an MP. And he faces being deselected, allegedly, before the next general election, and have the whip taken from him. Churchill's grandson, never, cried the Remainers, apparently so. And as he was heading into Downing Street to confront Boris Johnson today, the press surrounded him and asked him, what does he think of being deselected after 36 years, Sir Nicholas Soames? I just couldn't resist that. And to get that absolutely pathetic gag, you've just got to Google Sir Nicholas Soames, and you still might not laugh then, alright? This is the Richie Allen Show, 21 and a half minutes past the hour. Welcome to it. This is Christopher Cross. Good to be with you this Tuesday. Going live to Mark Collett in a couple of minutes' time. We'll be talking about this and what's likely to happen. Later on in the programme, Jill Henderson joins me live from the Ozarks. Great to be with you. What a day. Christopher Cross on the Richie Allen Show. The Ride Like the Wind, it is 25 minutes past the hour. It is Tuesday, September 3rd. Good to be with you as always. Thanks for all the tweets. You can tweet at Richie Allen Show now. Taking a different direction in the second hour. Don't panic, but this is very important. So we're going to stay with Brexit for most of the rest of this hour of the programme. At Richie Allen Show on Twitter. Let me welcome back to the programme a journalist, a Conservative commentator, a former politician and author. He wrote a very interesting book called The Fall of Western Man, which I found very interesting when I read it. You can find out more about that on the website thefallofwesternman.com. He also makes a very interesting and very well presented and produced podcast as well. Check that out. And you can find him on Twitter if you haven't come across him before. His Twitter handle is Mark A. Collett. That's Collett. Always enjoy speaking with Mark Collett. Mark, welcome back to the programme. How you doing?
Hello, Richie. It's great to be back. Although I think calling me a conservative is a bit of a stretch.
Well, yeah, labels. Yeah, we do labels a lot, don't we? We pigeonhole ourselves, not just ourselves, but other people. Maybe we shouldn't do that.
I'm more of a nationalist than a conservative.
Fair enough,
watching these conservatives mess up Brexit. What are they actually trying to conserve other than their own financial well-being?
Hey, listen, just before we talk about, very good point, just before we talk about what's happened today, what's likely to happen this evening and tomorrow, it's got to be mentioned, I can't not note this, but when I was away on holiday a couple of weeks back, the national press and a charity called Hope Not Hate took me to task without asking me or offering me right of reply. Not so much for my own opinions, but because I hosted hate mongers like you, Mark Collett. You got to mention, not only you, but other people whom they've deemed as far right fringe figures, and that I shouldn't be speaking to people like you. These are dangerous and worrying times for freedom of speech, aren't they? Let's be honest about it. I take it with a pinch of salt when the press has a pop at me for speaking to people. I like meeting people who think differently than me, and long may that continue, but there are worrying times ahead for free speech, right?
There certainly is, and there's a huge double standard with free speech as well. I mean, if somebody said today that Boris Johnson had been stood in front of a huge swastika giving a speech, everyone would be absolutely outraged. They'd all be going crazy. They'd be saying, is he out of his mind? He must resign immediately. He shouldn't hold any public roles, let alone be Prime Minister. He could never be leader of the Conservatives after standing in front of a swastika. But Jeremy Corbyn openly stands in front of communist flags that have inspired the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, flags of regimes that have tortured, massacred, sent people to the gulags, done these horrific crimes. And no one really makes a fuss, do they? He can stand in front of these communist flags and he's still accepted in the House of Commons. Well,
hang on, my friend. He gets battered. I have no time for any of them, as you well know. He gets hammered for these associations, for these alleged associations, for alleged sympathies with Hezbollah and Iran. He gets absolutely slaughtered for it, and the alleged anti-Semitism that he allegedly tolerates. I think, much as I have no time for... He does for
the anti-Semitism, which is false, but he doesn't for standing in front of communist flags.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think... I mean, the question is, had Boris Johnson stood in front of a swastika, would he be leader of the Conservatives? No. But Jeremy Corbyn can stand in front of a communist flag, and communists murdered far, far more people than the Nazis are accused of murdering, yet he can stand in front of communist flags, and he's the leader of the Labour Party.
Might that be because they destroy him by other means, maybe? They don't bother with that because they've got enough going on by hammering him for the IRA, by hammering him for Iran and Hezbollah. Maybe they don't need to beat him up for standing in front of flags and talking about Lenin and Marxism and talking about those allegiances. Maybe it's just, look, I'm picking bloody hairs with you here, but yeah, look, I take what you're saying on board. Look, these are dangerous times. I've never believed, Mark, since the vote to leave the European Union, happy and all though I was when I got the result, surprised as I was when the result came in on the 24th of June 3 years ago, I never believed for a minute that it would ever happen. Nothing that has happened since then has made me change my mind. I'm pretty pessimistic. How have you read what's been happening in the last few days and even today? What do you think of it, and what do you think about leaving the European Union? Ultimately, will it ever happen?
I'm not sure. And if it does happen, will it happen in the way that people wanted it to happen? You know, we were told that it was an in-out referendum, that the government would implement the choice the people made. And what they actually meant by that is, when you vote to remain, which we're sure you're going to vote to remain because the government spent all of this money, all of the taxpayers' money telling you to remain, so obviously you're going to do what you're told. But when you remain, that'll be the end of the issue. You'll all have to shut up then, and we'll put it to bed and never talk about it again. What they weren't banking on is for people to vote leave. And then when they did vote leave, all of a sudden that very, very simple promise came under huge scrutiny, and people were saying, oh, well, now we need another vote, don't we? How to implement what's been voted on before. We need another vote to make sure we voted the right way the first time. And it's all just a complete farce. And then when a deal is worked out, the deal is so bad, so poorly worded. It's not a deal. Theresa May's deal was a capitulation. It handed billions and billions of pounds to the EU. It still gave them power over our borders, over imports and exports. Absolute madness. And here we are now with Boris Johnson seemingly trying to push for a no-deal Brexit. And people within his own party, one person within his own party has just crossed the floor, wiping out his one-seat majority and plunging Parliament into absolute chaos. And these are people who've been elected. Now, you've got to remember, people who are elected aren't elected to lead. They're elected to represent. They're elected to represent the people, because we can't all go and sit in Parliament. So we elect someone to go and speak in Parliament on our behalf. Well, whose behalf is that man speaking on behalf of? Who's he talking for? He's speaking for himself. He's speaking for big business. He's speaking for the internationalists, the globalists. He's not speaking for the majority of people in Britain, because the majority of people voted to leave. These politicians are self-serving parasites.
You have it here in Salford. Some people might be, look, I'm not going to do that. I do it all the time. I do the mainstream media thing of people, talking about language. To hell with it. There is a parasitic nature to what they do. Rebecca Long Bailey is the MP for Salford and Eccles. That's where I am these days. And 58.6 or 7% of people in this kind of traditional working class kind of stronghold voted to leave. And I don't think they voted to leave because they're a bunch of little Englanders or xenophobes. I think they were concerned about the effect that, the influx of a low-skilled migrant workforce would have on their prospects. And that's not racism. And I said this to you before, Mark. You and I agreed on this. Maybe it wasn't you. But as somebody who defines himself and thinks of himself as a genuine socialist, and I know my listeners are tired of me saying that, socialists traditionally were very, not just sceptical, but very much against these massive political unions because of the effect that those unions had on sovereignty, but also on ordinary working men and women. Look, what you described, Philip Lee, there, if we leave out the parasite just for a minute, I think you perfectly described who he is, and I think he would be fairly representative of politicians in general. So democracy is a sham then. We don't have a democracy. We couldn't have. It doesn't exist. It never has done. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, democracy is a complete sham. It's built on this two-party system where instead of voting for who you want to vote for or who represents what you actually believe in, you vote for the party most likely to beat the party that you really don't like. So you vote Conservative because you really hate Labour, or you vote Labour because you really hate the Conservatives. You're not actually voting for somebody that you like. You're voting for the candidate most likely to beat the candidate you don't like. And that's an insane way of doing business or doing politics, but that's where we are. That's what we've ended up with. And then you've got people who are these almost insane tribal voters that treat voting as if it's a football match. Or, I've been watching Man United with me dad since I was 6. I'll never support another team. Well, that's fine for football, but you shouldn't be like that over voting. If your dad voted Labour and his granddad voted Labour, but now Labour stands for something completely different to what they stood for when your dad and granddad voted for them, you don't have to support them. But because of this ridiculous tribal voting and this sort of two-party system, democracy has failed. Yet when we have real democracy and we vote on an issue like we did with Brexit, and people aren't tied to old party associations or party political lines, the people speak very differently to how they speak when they're tied in to this farcical sham parliamentary democracy.
Well, it's got Mark Collett as our guest, by the way. It's at Mark A. Collett on Twitter. And check out The Fall of westernman.com. Check out the book. It's a really interesting read. And don't be shaking your head there just because you might not agree with some opinions maybe expressed by Mark on this programme. You might very well do. The majority of my listeners might be nodding in agreement. But he's a very interesting guy, Mark. I like him. I like his podcasts. I like people who like to engage with people who see the world a bit differently than them, and that's in danger. That I'm certainly not patronising you, Mark. You know that we're in danger of losing that. It's a serious thing. That's one of the fallouts of this whole Brexit thing, this whole EU referendum, and I wonder, is it a deliberate part of that whole thing, is that people are becoming more and more polarised. We talk about identity politics, less likely to even tolerate those who see the issues a bit different than them. You encounter this all the time as a nationalist, as a writer. Tell us about that. Are you noticing it? It's getting worse, Mark, the intolerance of other opinions, other points of view.
Well, we're no longer a community. What we've got here in Britain, we've got this melting pot that we're told is magical, with people with different opinions, different cultures, different ways of life, different religions. But the problem is, if you end up with this melting pot where everyone has different cultures, opinions, ways of life, often those ways of life, those opinions, those cultures are not only different, but they can be diametrically opposed. And when you reach that point, you're obviously going to have some form of polarization, which eventually leads to trouble and strife. And that's what you've got here with Brexit, because you've got two very different sets of people. You've got one set of people who ultimately want to be British, they want to be English, they want to retain their ways of life, they want to stop migration, they want to remain as essentially a community of indigenous people who embraces their culture and the things that they hold dear to. And on the other hand, you've got a group of people who want to be multicultural, they want to be globalist, they want to embrace the internationalist world, they want to embrace this European culture. It's not really European culture, it's not European culture at all, it's sort of a one-size-fits-all globalist internationalist culture. And those two things are completely opposed. And when you have such opposition, you're always going to have a huge gulf, and you're going to have polarization. That's completely normal. And I think that isn't by design, because obviously the people in Parliament, or the majority of people in Parliament, would rather everyone had just voted Remain. They don't want this polarisation. This polarisation is a backlash against the globalist system. It's a nationalist awakening. People are now talking about identity. Just the other week, we went out and did a survey of people in working class communities around the UK, and we asked people what they thought of mass immigration, and nearly 2/3 of people we spoke to said they thought it was a bad thing. They didn't want white people to become a minority. Now, I don't think all those people are hate-filled monsters. I think that's just natural. I think if you went anywhere in the world and said to any group of indigenous people, do you want to become a minority in your own homeland? They'd say no, and rightly so. And that is a key component of why people voted for Brexit, because they're sick of this mass immigration. They're sick of endless numbers of people swamping this country.
Let me ask you this. I know you've been asked this before, and you took it on in your book, The Fall of Western Man. I have a little bit of sympathy when I see people on social media laughing at the notion of culture. And sometimes nationalist commentators and conservative commentators will go on social media and will talk about our culture as being evaporated, our culture. And others, other English people, white English people, and I always check it, it's predominantly white English people, they laugh and they ask the nationalist or the conservative to define this culture that they want to protect, or that we want to protect, or that you might want to protect. What is it? How would you describe it? What is British culture? What is UK culture? What is it that differentiates it from, from another culture? If you could juxtapose it with any other culture, define it, Mark. What is it?
Well, that's a very hard thing to define in one soundbite, because it's something that's evolved, it's grown, it's been with us for thousands and thousands of years. It's everything from the little country pub where people go with their girlfriend to steak and chips, to the country fair, to the village fete, to little boys climbing up trees with sticks to knock down conkers, to put them on shoestrings, to play a game. All of these things are part of British or English culture, and they're things that are dear to us. Now, you might not see them straight away because you're surrounded by them. You've been brought up in them, so you don't notice them as much as if if you went somewhere else. If you went and lived in, say, India or Japan, and you noticed their little quirks, their cultural icons or attributes, you would see them straight away because you're an outsider looking in, so they'd be much easier to spot. But we're surrounded by all of those things, and all of those things are now being belittled. They're being mocked. They basically become things of ridicule that the globalist elite laugh at and then want to take away from us and tell us that we're racists for wanting to hold on to them. Well, why are we? Why are we racist for wanting our own culture?
Let me jump in. Thanks for allowing me to interrupt you. I appreciate that. Look, you're too intelligent for me to let you away with what you just said, so I'm going to have a go at you. You said, taking the girlfriend to the country pub. Yes. Yeah, you see that in Western Europe. You mentioned the countryside, you mentioned the fair, other things that you've claimed to be British. Look, I happen to know, and I'm no virtue signaller, and I'm completely against unfettered immigration and what it does to working communities. Completely against it. I voted to leave the European Union. I would want to control immigration to prevent it having the effect that it is having on vital public services here and the effect it's having on low-skilled or semi-skilled workers. That's pretty much the old socialist mantra. But these things you described, and I'm not trying to play the nice guy here. My listeners know me too well for me to get away with that. But I see Asian couples going to the pub. I see Asian couples having fish and chips. I see Asian couples and other ethnic couples going to the country fairs and doing all of that as well. I don't get that. That's too vague. I'm not letting you away with that. It's too vague to say that's our culture. And I've travelled around the world. I've been lucky enough to see a few different places, Central America, all over Europe, North America. And I see people, human beings, fundamentally kind of doing the same things, gathering, meeting, socialising, whether it's over a beer or over a cup of tea or a coffee. I just don't get this culture thing, Mark. You've not convinced me that there is a distinguishable English culture. And I'm not trying to be, an arsehole with you, you know that. I just don't see it. I don't see a distinguishable, definitely different. I know you've said it's difficult to describe, but I don't see that at all.
Well, I do. I see things like, take for example, Heckington Show. It's the largest village show in the whole country. Tens of thousands of people go there to take part in, things that you would see at a traditional village show. There's livestock, there's tractors, there's traditional baking, there's miniature garden competitions that the school children bring their miniature gardens to. You go to a place like that and you will see English culture. You'll be surrounded by decent people. You will have a lovely weekend. And yes, some ethnic minorities will go to events like that and they will assimilate. They will try to fit in. But I can tell you now, if you compare something like the Heckington Show, attended by thousands of English people, and you go to like the Notting Hill Carnival, the two are very different. And one is English culture and one is madness that quite often ends in a riot and needs heavy policing. And you can see the difference between what is quintessentially English and what has been brought here to replace what is quintessentially English. And London isn't quintessentially English anymore. That's why it has the problems it has, because our culture, our way of life, our high IQ, high trust society has been absolutely shattered, and our people are being replaced by migrants who don't hold the same values as us.
You talk about the high IQ society. Some listeners who are paying attention to this close attention will say that the NHS has thrived. Particularly, that's just one area of the UK. The NHS has thrived on high IQ, educated migrant workers coming in from all over the world, from as far away as the Philippines, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, coming in here and have done incredibly well. And that, says to you, they might say to you, well, what do you say to that then? Where's this high IQ coming into it?
Well, that's a complete nonsense. For a start, the NHS would have been far, far better served by training British people, by training English people, by training people up who are indigenous to this to this group of islands and giving them jobs and making sure that we had the skills we needed. And that's good because it gives people some pride and it helps people. So you don't have these young girls ending up just being single mums on the estate on benefits. And also taking people from less advantaged places in the world, taking people from Africa and the Indian subcontinent who have skills is just so we can drive down wages is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for us. It's not a good thing for our people. And it's also not a good thing for the countries that we take those skilled individuals from. And what's more, there are huge problems, which I'm sure you're aware of, in the NHS of hospital workers who can't speak good English not being able to deal with patients in a professional or decent manner. We need to train our own people. What the politicians do is constantly tell us, oh, we need all these immigrants to fill the jobs. No, politicians want to bring immigrants in to fill the jobs because they'll accept lower pay and lower standards, and that is not the right way to go about things.
Loads of tweets on this. Mad Monk says, what about the football? Can't get more English than that, and that is policed more than the Notting Hill Carnival. Not an apples to apples comparison. Oz Little, tweeting as Quebec, says, Mark sounds like a posh racist snob. I don't think he's racist. I'm sure he's not posh. Are you posh, Mark?
I don't know. I'll let you be the judge of that.
Yeah, I don't know you well enough to know that, but I'm not labelling people as racist because they say things that I might disagree with. William says, Scotland is one of the most multicultural nations going. I think Mark should come up for a visit and see people working together and getting on. You see, I'm Irish, obviously, and I think I hear conservative and nationalist commentators in Ireland talking about our culture. Our culture. It's going. It's on the wane. It's on the way. It's gone. It's going to be vamoosed. It's going to be disappeared. And I think, well, what is our culture? And I left Ireland many years ago. And I think Irish people, no more or no less, are a bright than anybody else, are a bright people, are an industrious people, are a social people. But over the years, for whatever reason, we've become very reliant on alcohol for our fun. I don't mean the country is, you know, I'm not going to kind of segue into that stereotype that, you know, Ireland is a drunk country. No, but we've kind of eschewed all other things. The pub has become pretty much the be all and the end all of social life. And we have that thing where we work all week long in crazy jobs. And I'm building up to something here, Mark. We work all week long in crazy shitty jobs for corporations that don't care about us. And we drown our sorrows at weekends. And we go into work again on a Monday morning. And we do it all over again. And that's white Irish people. I'm going to say to you, that's your culture. That is white English culture today. And you're not going to agree with that. I'm going to give you plenty of time to argue with me. It's the culture of going to a job that you can't stand, spending hours on a motorway in a car that you haven't paid for, to do a shit job for somebody you bloody hate, and then you drown your sorrows at the weekend. That's our culture. And I'm not blaming anybody from I know you're not either, by the way. I'm not blaming anybody from Africa or from Pakistan or India for that. We have ourselves to blame for any disappearance of any once romantic culture that we might have had. Go ahead.
How did you become so disillusioned?
Cynical.
You basically just described what globalists have turned our world into. That isn't how the world used to be. People had pride in their community. People had pride in the trades they did. People used to actually fight to keep their jobs. They went on strike and fought with the police to keep the pits open because they had pride in what they did. They loved their communities. Life wasn't always like that, Richie, and you know it wasn't. People didn't sit for hours in traffic until mass immigration had flooded this country with so many people that we were stuck in this traffic because there's so many people that the roads can't cope with them. There's so many people that the hospital waiting lists are too long and your mum can't see the GP anymore. You know why this has happened as well as I do.
Yeah, but we blame migrants though. But hang on, and this is where you and I have banged heads before, and we will again in the future, no doubt. And I've had this out with Lana from Red Ice, and I've had it out with other people. I say we because I'm just as much of a victim as you of identity politics. We all are. We all pigeonhole ourselves. We traditionally blame the dark-skinned migrant, and thus nothing ever gets done. It never gets done because we see the symptom, which is the gentleman who's come in from Poland, or he's come in from Romania, or he's come from North Africa, or wherever. And we are conditioned to seeing him as the enemy and the responsibility for that bloody problem. And he isn't. It's not his fault. He's a human being with aspirations and desperation, just like all the rest of us. And we don't take on collectively the system that you just eloquently described there. That's the problem. It pisses me off, not you, love having you on. It pisses me off that we always talk about the flooding of this and the flooding of that and them over there and cultures. Hang on a second. Where did the original plan for this come from? Who's behind it? Well, let's deal with that. Over to you.
Well, look, I've never blamed these people. But let me make it totally clear. They have no right to be here. They have no claim to this soil. This is our land. This is Europe. But the fact is, the reason they're here is not their fault. I don't blame them, but I'm not giving them any claim to this soil. The people who are to blame are the parasite politicians. The people who are to blame are the globalists. The people who are to blame are the ones that own the big businesses and the media, the ones that have colluded to push this plan of flooding Western nations with people from all over the world. And this isn't going to end happily. And you're talking about polarization. Well, I can tell you this now. As this mass migration plan continues, there'll be much greater strife, much greater polarization, and much greater suffering. And it'll be brought about not by people like me, who get the rap for all the strife and get called out for being haters. Yeah. It'll be brought about by the globalists and by their political puppets in office.
I'll never call you a hater or a racist. And again, I'm not patronising because I don't believe you to be one. I don't care what The Guardian thinks of that or Hope Not Hate or any of the rest of the arseholes. I like you because I like talking to you. Look, if your country has been destroyed by economic sanctions that the UK government was complicit in, if your country has been bombed to smithereens by terrorist groups that your country, the United Kingdom, had a hand in arming, how dare you or me or anybody else say to a chap who's over here, regardless of his religion, that you've got no effing claim to this soil? They didn't start it, Mark. I could go back to the famine. One of the greatest mythologies in the history of humankind, that there was a potato famine in Ireland. There never was. Every bit of food and produce in that country was stolen by the British Empire to feed British soldiers all around the world. At what point do we say it's wrong to say you don't have any claim to this soil? Many of these people will say, listen, we were doing fine and dandy, thanks very much, in Libya, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq, till you guys came along. So Mark, don't tell me I've got no claim to this soil. Tough shit, Paddy. I'm here now. You brought me here. Go ahead, mate.
Well, what I'm saying is, though, who's to blame? It's the globalists. It's the politicians. The people who have taken us into these wars, the people who have destabilized the Middle East, are the people that I am constantly calling out. I don't get into trouble because I say that mass immigration is harming Britain. There's plenty of people who say mass immigration is harming Britain.
I would agree with you.
I get into trouble because I say who is behind mass immigration. Now, there are people out there who are either naive or willfully misleading the public. And they claim that this nightmare, this mass immigration, has been brought about by accident, by a series of unfortunate mistakes, and no one's to blame. Now, I don't follow that school of thought. I place the blame at the globalists, the internationalists, and their political puppets. And that is why I cop so much flack. If I was just wandering around blaming random immigrants on the street or pretending mass immigration was some unfortunate accident that we just had to stop, I wouldn't get into half as much trouble.
I know that. Final question on that then, because you and I share the same opinions about the banking elite and the globalists behind it. Well, why then say to some bloke, you have no right to this soil? Why aren't we engaging with people? I've never understood this. Why aren't we engaging with people who've come from these countries because we have the same enemy? Why say you've no right to this soil? Why not say, here's a cup of tea, pal, we've got a common enemy? Go ahead.
Because they're not being brought here to come in and have a cup of tea. They're being brought here because they create strife. They're creating problems. They're not here to assimilate and get on with us. They're here because it creates problems. They're here because it creates division. But
it's not their fault, Mark. Hang on. You just said it's not their fault, and I agree with you.
It's not their fault.
So if they're victims of it, as much as the people here are, why not reach out and try and educate these people. Listen,
because
you've come from Syria.
To live a different,
come on, you can't say that. But you don't try, though. You've got to say to some guy from Syria who's moved into Moss Side, you've got to have dinner with him. You've got to have. When the guy's English.
I want to have dinner with him.
I do. I want to have dinner. I want to have dinner with him. I want to say to him, do you have any idea how you came to be here and who's behind it? That's what I want to do. Go on.
Well, I want to unite the indigenous people of these islands, and I want them to start embracing their own culture. I want them to start embracing each other, and I want to resurrect our community. And when we've resurrected that community, I want to make sure these politicians are gone from Westminster and that they never ever come back. That is what I want to do. And I don't want a multicultural globalist community. I want our community, and I want our nations to be how they always were.
And that's the final word. I'm a man of my word. I like to give my guest the final word. May, thanks for coming back on thefallofwesternman.com. Cheers, Mark. I hope to talk to you again real soon. Thefallofwesternman.com is where you can find Mark's book, and he's very generous. You can read it online for free if you want. But I always say it, if you read a book, especially written by somebody in the independent media, support it by spending some money with him. Check it out, thefallofwesternman.com. Good to have Mark Collett back on the programme today, and many of you are agreeing with him. That's no bad thing. It's no good thing, but it's no bad thing either. Thanks for the comments. William says, he's squirming, Richie. I will have dinner with just about anyone, but most likely not Mark, says William. Come on, you can't be contradicting yourself there, William. Craig says, hi Richie, Craig in Scotland here. I've lived in England and Scotland, and our multiculturalism up here is nothing like it is in England. You can't compare it, writes Craig, to what is happening in England. And Diane, who's not far from my hometown. How you doing, Diane? I invited Diane on this programme ages ago. I've got to sort that one out. Must sort that out, actually, because she's an interesting person on a number of levels, is Diane. Diane says, funny, Mark sounds like Enoch Powell. He was saying the same thing years ago. Powell wasn't a racist, but he could see the plan and the unfortunate outcome. I've got to point out, I've got no opinion of Powell, but I've just got to, I imagine many listeners to this programme, the Rivers of Blood speech and all that, might see Enoch Powell differently. Tiger Johnson says, I both agree and disagree with Mark on various points. Thanks for having him on, says Tiger. And Samantha tweets, Richie, you just described my husband. Sits in traffic for 3 hours every day for a bloody job he hates, and a boss who is a fucking arse, says Samantha. Then at weekends he needs a beer to get over the shit week. Yes. Yeah. Ultimately, yes. Indeed. Peter tweets, my heritage is Irish / Northern Ireland, but from British. Just for context, what I always question is, when do people consider this little set of islands full? I'm not against immigration, by the way, says Peter. Thank you for that, Peter. And there was, let me scroll on down there. There was an interesting tweet from a regular listener, Jason. Jason says, Richie, how can you say that there is no English or British culture? What about the music, literature, art, philosophy, technological innovation that this tiny island nation has given the world? It pales, Jason, into insignificance when measured against the Irish. I'm not starting a pissing contest now with my English brethren and sistren, or my British brethren and sistren. By the way, I'm not going to do that. I hear you loud and clear. Thanks for your tweets. It's at Richie Allen Show. Hi to Liz Jones. Hi to Martin in Spain. Hi to Kashi. How you doing, Kashi, as well? And to everybody who's tweeting the programme today. I'm really looking forward, by the way, to chatting for the second time. It's been ages since she was on. Jill Henderson will join the programme live from the Ozarks in about 5 or 6 minutes' time. What a special person Jill Henderson is. Author, researcher. I could be here all day. I'll tell you a little bit more about her in a couple of minutes before we say hello to her. It is the Richie Allen Show. It is live on Fab Radio 2 here in Manchester, even though I'm in Salford in Greater Manchester. Triggerwarning.tv. We're live on richieallen.co.uk, and of course the programme broadcasts on the TuneIn app. So get the TuneIn app if you haven't got that. But it's also archived on Spotify, iTunes and Podomatic. And I do recommend another app that's very, very, very good. And that app is none other than the Truth Seeker app. If you haven't checked out the Truth Seeker app before, do check it out. It's very, very good indeed. Shall we have the headlines? I'm not sure there's been any great developments in the last half an hour since the monologue, but you never know. So we'll head over to FSN for the headlines on the Richie Allen Show for September 3rd. It's Tuesday's programme. The headlines from FSN. Here we go.
From Feature Story News in London, I'm Ollie Barrett. Hong Kong's embattled chief executive has denied wanting to quit despite the release of a recording of her saying just that. British MPs are expected to vote on whether to take control of House of Commons business as part of an attempt to rule out a no-deal Brexit. Residents in parts of the Bahamas are calling for rescue missions, with many stranded because of Hurricane Dorian. And a Russian blogger has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for a tweet he wrote after opposition protests in Moscow.
Thank you very much, Ollie. Don't forget, later on this evening around about 10 p.m. at Westminster, MPs will vote on whether they can take control of the business of the House. This will happen after a debate. If they succeed, and they just very well might succeed, they will then be able to schedule or table a bill tomorrow, a bill that would delay Brexit even further beyond the October 31st deadline and delay Brexit till January 31st. These are strange times, are they not? This is the Richie Allen Show. I've said that already. Coming up in a couple of minutes, Jill Henderson. Before that, have a listen to this.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today.
Lovely stuff. Here's music from Erasure on your Richie Allen Show. Saw them live a couple of years ago when they were supporting Robbie Williams at the Etihad Stadium in Manchester, and I enjoyed them. The most listened to independent radio show in Europe. This is your Richie Allen Show. Jill Henderson is next after Vince and the Boys. Music from Erasure, that sometimes on the Richie Allen Show. Jill is standing by. We'll welcome Jill in about 60 seconds. Just a couple of tweets there that came in. John Stott, how you doing, John? John and Sarah. John says, Richie, we had children going up chimneys into workhouses, and we had the Peterloo massacre during so-called more civilised times. That's a very good point, John. I appreciate that. Thank you. We do tend to romanticise the past. One or two of you saying maybe Mark, with the best will in the world, Mark Collett, is maybe romanticising the past a little bit, maybe. I don't know. I think he makes some interesting points. It's about discussion, really, isn't it? That's what it's about. Right, I'm sure you'll have questions and comments for Jill. I'm going to dial up Jill there, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, lest you don't know. I'm sure, because of our connections over the years, I'm sure many of you know who Jill is. Special person, and has an incredibly impressive resume, or CV, as we would say here in the UK. She's a freelance journalist. She's written feature articles on ecological and sustainable agriculture for Acres USA magazine. She's a long-time contributor to Llewellyn's Herbal Almanac. She's written books herself like The Healing Power of Kitchen Herbs, The Ozarks, and The Garden Seed Saving Guide. She co-wrote with her husband Dean Illuminati Agenda 21, The Luciferian Plan to Destroy Creation, and she blogs at showmeoz.wordpress.com. That's showmeoz.wordpress.com, and she blogs about threats and solutions to human and ecological health, healing herbs, wild foraging, homesteading, and much more. It's brilliant to welcome back to the programme, because she joined us earlier in the year or late last year. Great to have Jill Henderson back live from the Ozarks. Welcome back, Jill. How are you doing?
I am doing great, Richie. Thank you so much for having me. Always enjoy talking to you.
That's fabulous. Hey, tell me about the Ozarks, Jill. What's it like? How would you sell the Ozarks to somebody who, because tourists, they look at the United States, they think, of course, Florida, they think New York City, of course, DC, they think Los Angeles, but the Ozarks, Jill, it's almost magical just saying it out loud, the Ozarks. Tell us about it.
Well, if people want to read about it, they can check out my book called The Ozarks. It's sort of my love affair with this region, and it's an anomaly in this region in that it's sort of mountainous hills that sort of jut up out of the plains, and from the air it kind of looks like a brain. It undulates, and we have low hills. We call them hills, but they're classified as mountains. We have lots of hills and hollers and beautiful, clear running streams that are spring fed. We have caves. We have a gorgeous forest. It's a hardwood oak hickory forest that covers the majority of the hills. They're very rocky and steep in places. And so farming and other things like that it's not really conducive here. There are areas where people can farm, but because of its topography, the rough nature of it, there isn't a lot of like classic agriculture here. It's mostly hay and cows and forestry and wildlife. And so it's a beautiful area that's sort of still lost in time. And if people want to kind of get away from it all and just kind of go back a little bit to where life was simpler, there is a vast stretch of the Ozarks that is still like that today. So it's
Brilliant.
A beautiful place to live. It's clean and still wild in many respects.
That's a wonderful advertisement for it. Is it a case though of come and get back to the way it used to be, but then go home? Is that the caveat to tourists? Come and see it, but then get your arse back home. Is that how it is?
I think some of the locals would say that. Yeah, they welcome visitors and tourists, but they also kind of turn their noses up to snobbery and to people who walk around sort of flouting their wealth. I mean, there are those people here who have money and stuff, but the Ozarkers themselves are middle class. That's a good way of saying it. But yeah, they like their privacy. They keep to themselves. They enjoy a simple life. And they like it that way. They don't really want it to change.
Lovely. I'd love to visit. I've been to the States only the one time. And yeah, I did the East Coast. Never venture too far away from the East Coast. But maybe some day in the future. Although visas and people like me, I'm not too sure. Anyway, thanks for coming on today, Jill. I'm thrilled you're back. Loved having you on. Huge reaction last time you were on the programme. Jill Henderson, the author, the blogger. showmeoz.wordpress.com. Check it out. Read the books I mentioned. They're absolutely terrific. We're going to talk a little bit about 5G. And I was thinking last week, 5G now. We've talked a bit about that. What are we going to do with it? It seems to be here. I don't know how it is. I suppose that's a great place to start, Jill. How is it when I say where you are, obviously in the Ozarks, I don't imagine you'll have too many 5G towers there. Maybe you will. But in the States, where are we with the actual implementation of it and it being up and running? Because it is up and running here in the UK, sadly, despite the opposition to it, despite the knowledge that it will do serious damage to not just us, but to animal life, maybe even plant life. How is it in the US with implementing it?
It's going. I mean, they're on schedule. I mean, we have bigger cities here like Dallas, Kansas City, of course, LA. I mean, Denver. I mean, in any of your big metropolitan areas, they've already got all the infrastructure or most of the infrastructure up, and they are already implementing it in certain cities and large metropolitan areas. You certainly see, even in the countryside and in small towns, everywhere, you are seeing what were once very large, 3G and 4G cell towers, the classic cell tower, with the antennas that are very large and very high in the air. They are taking those and modifying them and bringing those antennas down towards the ground in preparation for 5G, because 5G does not send out long wave signals. And so they need to bring everything closer to the ground, closer to the tops of our heads, just above the tree line. And then on top of that, they are adding the small cell emitters everywhere they can. So we are definitely rolling into it as quickly as they had anticipated. We do have quite a number of cities and municipalities fighting 5G, particularly in California. That's probably the big one because it's a very liberal state. And so there's a lot of resistance there. There are lots of other cities and municipalities and even like neighborhoods and things that are fighting the adding on of the small cell emitters for various reasons, but without a whole lot of luck, I have to say. I mean, I think that right now they're fighting about right-of-ways. They're fighting about using current infrastructure instead of the 5G technology. We've seen our own phone and internet company, CenturyLink. They're not a big provider like, say, Verizon is, or Vodafone, or one of those big players in 5G. They came out to our rural area, and we have broadband here at our home, which is just miraculous considering where we live, so rural. But there was broadband here at our house, and that means it's a wireless. It goes through the cable line, the phone line. And so we have high-speed broadband here, but that's CenturyLink. And when we called to ask about, their implementation of 5G, it looks like they're building up more of their broadband capacity in our rural areas. So in other words, they're upgrading their lines so that they can send broadband to each individual home. And I think they're doing that in competition with 5G, so they can provide rural customers with safer broadband, or at least the broadband that they already have. So they're building onto that infrastructure, which for me is very reassuring because, if they've already got an area covered, I think those will be one of the last areas to get any of the 5G small cell emitters. So
yeah, you've been following this, haven't you? And you've been following it here in the UK, where we've had the culling of trees to make way for this. I mean, I don't want to be trying to sound like some sort of, martyr or some sort of person that I'm not, but there's something perverse about that. I mean, that's anti-life, isn't it? It's like anti-human to destroy healthy trees in neighbourhoods. I mean, we need these trees, don't we? I mean, I live in a built-up urban neighbourhood, a city called Salford. I'm a couple of miles from Manchester, which is one of Europe's biggest cities. And, we've got these big old houses that were built in the 1920s everywhere. But it's lovely because we're surrounded by lots and lots and lots of trees everywhere. And if they're removed, it's not only devastating for the look of the place, but for the spirituality of the place, but for the health of the area, and the health of the people in it. It's anti-humanity, isn't it? To take trees down.
Yeah, it is. It's not just anti-humanity. It's sort of anti-creation too, because I mean, cities in themselves, by their nature, because of all the concrete and, there's not a lot of, open ground. It's all covered with, asphalt and concrete and whatnot. And that doesn't allow rain to permeate into the earth. It runs off and really devastating kind of flooding and erosion incidences. But so, the trees, not only do they emit a certain energetic frequency that is compatible with human life. I mean, we sort of resonate with our creation, right? It was made that way. But when you start taking out trees, you're also reducing like carbon sequestering. So they're saying we have this big, huge climate change crisis and carbon is at the center of it. And so they're going to go around cutting down all these trees, which sequester carbon naturally. They take it out of the air and put it in the ground where it belongs. It also reduces shade and cooling of cities. So the temperature is going to go up. It reduces the beauty of it. It reduces the diversity of life. So where are the birds going to nest? Where are the lizards going to crawl? Where are the ants and other creatures going to live if you don't have any vegetation? And part of the reason that they're cutting down all the trees is because 5G operates off of pulsed millimeter waves, and they have, unlike the 4G and LTE or even 3G or pretty much anything else before 5G, the radio frequency bands that they use are very short. They're powerful. They're very short, but they also they're not powerful enough to go through very sturdy structures like buildings that have brick or concrete or things like that. They really stinks for going through the structures. It also can't go around corners. It can't go up and over buildings or other obstacles. And even rain. I mean, their own literature says that even rain or very foggy conditions can reduce the transmission of their signals. And so, but they're cutting down all the trees so that that's just fewer obstacles that they have to go around with these small cell emitters. So they're cutting them all down so that they don't have to deal with them, which is absolutely ludicrous.
Insane. So I think some of our listeners have sat bolt upright in their chairs, Jill. I'll tell you why. Jill Henderson is our guest, folks. Incredibly accomplished lady. And I'll tell you more about Jill as we go along. Jill, we've been told by other researchers, and I think, again, with the best will in the world, they weren't lying, but they were under the impression that these very fine millimetre waves would be able to get into houses very easily and reach us. But you're thinking that old concrete structures and old red bricked buildings, it might not be easy for the waves to penetrate them. If that's the case, I won't say I'm less worried, but I'm slightly a little bit more relieved about the prospect of one of these transmitters being near my house. What do you think?
Well, I think that is, I hate to say it, Richie, but I think that's a little naive. I mean, it's a little misguided, and here I'll tell you why. And it's not an insult. It's just
no. Of course, go ahead. Yeah.
It's a little naive because, and I think it's misleading. Maybe that's a better word. It's misleading on behalf of the industry because although it may not be able to penetrate your home, a more solidly built structure, particularly those with brick and concrete, your windows don't stop it at all. And the way that the millimeter waves work is they use a series of these small cells are made up of phased array antennas. It's basically the same as military radar, sonar, ultrasonics, what they use in seismology to look into the earth. They're very powerful, and they're absolutely going to come through your windows. And not only that, but when you are using the 5G, say on your smartphone, these phased array antennas are literally going to pick you out one by one, and they are going to laser beam a signal directly onto you. If you're standing in the way, if your back is to one of these millimeter waves and it is targeted on your phone, it will go right through your body into your phone. So there's no escape from it in that way. You might be able to mitigate some of the damages, and we can talk about some of the ways you can do that later.
We will definitely,
yeah. But essentially, the way that this technology works is it's literally a laser beam shooting directly at your phone, not just everybody's phone, but your phone. And it will go and it will bounce off all these small cell receivers to get to your phone. And the second thing that's really dangerous about it is the actual mesh of electrosmog that we are going to be dealing with every single day of our lives. The moment you step out into the open air, you are going to be absolutely bombarded by electromagnetic frequency radiation. And this is radiation. Please do not be deceived. This is radiation, and I have document to prove it. And I think if you want to go to my blog, this morning I updated a post that talks about this Navy document. It's a Navy medical research document that was written back in 1971, in which they talk about all the biological and physiological effects that microwave radiation, EMFs, have on the human body. They've known this since at least 1971, but actually it probably went way back onto the inception of radar, which was in the early 1900s. So,
I don't want to be childish about this, but it ultimately cooks us slowly. Yeah. And I had Chris Busby on the program a few times earlier this year. Chris, who did so much great work alerting people to what happened in Fallujah when we used depleted uranium munitions over there and destroyed the village of Fallujah in Iraq, the city, and all those children born with deformities. Chris is a great guy, and he described this to me. The slow cooking is what leads to the tumours. Is that right, Jill?
Well, I would take his word on that, but yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, a microwave oven, your traditional classic microwave oven emits microwave radiation. These are radio frequencies or electric frequencies, both actually in a microwave oven. It's pretty much like radar in your kitchen. And that's what they used to call them, right? When they first came out, they called them the radar ranges.
Yeah, they did.
And then they changed the name to microwave because radar range implied danger. And so they changed the name to microwave. And if you stick your head in your microwave, you just have to imagine what might happen to your head. It's the same thing that's going to happen to your chicken or your vegetables. And if you put metal in there and you turn it on, it's going to catch on fire and cause a great explosion, because these microwaves are very, very powerful. And the energy inside of your microwave oven is very, very similar to what we're about to experience with 5G. It is absolutely right on par with what we're talking about here. And that's why your microwave oven is shielded all around to protect that radiation from escaping and killing you. Now, the proponents of the industry say, oh, well, we've measured all this, and it's just, all they've measured really is the thermal effects. And they keep going back to this about the thermal effects of cell phone radiation and cell phones. So like when you hold your cell phone up to your head, it gets kind of hot. Your ear gets kind of hot. The phone gets kind of hot. And they say, well, that only goes like a couple of millimeters into the surface of the skin, and it doesn't penetrate beyond that. And it's all about, it doesn't cook your brain, so it's safe. Well, but over time, and not even over time, you don't feel the effects of that radiation going deeper and deeper into your body. You only feel the external thermal reaction, and that's a very modest reaction initially. But over the long term, yeah, you're basically cooking your body with 5G and with any kind of cell phone. Even if you're still using 3G or 4G, it's all the same. Or even your walk around cordless phone. Oh, those things are like little cell towers. So it's very dangerous technology. They know it is. They know full well it is, and they say, well, we've done all the studies. Well, they haven't. They're bogus studies. They're puny studies. They're weak. They're infantile. If you want to really look at studies that have done on long-term health effects of microwave radiation from your cell phone technology and your wireless router and your little Fitbit and all the other wireless stuff, your Xbox, just all the stuff you can imagine, then I really encourage people to go to the California Brain Tumor Association website. It's a CABTA. I think it's COM. So that's the California Brain Tumor Association website. And on their website, they have lots of things that you can look at, but one of them is studies. And I'm going to bet you could spend probably the next 6 months reading all the studies that they have on there about the biological effects of radiation on the body from your cell phone.
And yet when US cable news, television news and radio discusses 5G, none of the academics are invited to participate in the discussions, Jill.
Oh, no, because 5G, just the initial infrastructure and the kind of, the initial profit off of 5G, that's just now, not what's coming in the future. It's $18 trillion business. I mean, that's $18 trillion of money that's going out to everybody who could get their fingers in this pie. And there's a lot of them, okay? And everybody wants a piece of the pie. And they are not going to turn back now. I mean, it's going to be a fight to the finish. And unfortunately, it's not just the companies that are involved, but, you look at groups like, well, you look at the news media, they're bought into it. Who do you think own those companies?
Brilliant,
they're into it.
Yeah.
Who do you think is running the pharmaceutical and medical industries? They're into it. I mean, I can't think of anybody who's not on the bandwagon because all they can see is dollar signs.
You mentioned Verizon, and we could mention AT&T, Vodafone. The television companies can't do business without Verizon, without AT&T, without Vodafone. So they're unlikely to challenge the prevailing opinion, which is this is brilliant for everybody. Download speeds will be huge. A better connected world and all that. It's complete nonsense. Let me just remind our listeners. Jill Henderson is our guest. Jill is a journalist and author, and she writes for Acres USA magazine, Herbal Almanac. She's written books like The Healing Power of Kitchen Herbs, The Ozarks, we mentioned earlier on, The Garden Seed Saving Guide, and with Dean Henderson, her husband, she co-wrote Illuminati Agenda 21, which I read, of course, last year, The Luciferian Plan to Destroy Creation. It's an incredibly important book, that as well. Check it out. Lots of comments on this on Twitter, unsurprisingly. And I know you wanted to talk today, just before we talk about some of the ways to mitigate the effects of it, which I know you're very interested in. I sent you an email today. I don't think you got it, but there's a lot of talk in UK media in the last couple of days about problems with the male and female libido, particularly the male libido. Men are losing interest in being physical with their partners, being amorous. And we often talk in this country as well about the rise in insomnia, and if it's not insomnia, sleep problems in general. And I believe in my heart of hearts, even though I don't have any degree in science, I believe that the issue we're discussing now is tied into insomnia, sleeplessness in general, irritation, irritability, arguing with one another in ways that we never did before. And I'm going to say it, the male sex drive, the female sex drive, and male and female fertility, Jill.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could just go on from there. I mean, these are just a few of the biological and physiological effects from EMF. You can have genetic damage to your DNA, literally breaks the strands of your DNA. That can be, that will be passed down to the next probably 4 generations at least, and that's assuming that they don't have this technology as well.
What would that mean, Jill? Sorry to interrupt you. What might that mean? So if my DNA is damaged or altered in a way, and we have children, and then our children have their children, our grandchildren, what kind of things might that mean for them? What sort of problems might they have?
Well, all kinds of problems. I mean, let's start with cancer. I mean, since cancer is at epidemic levels, when you break strands of DNA, the incidence of cancer goes sky high, because that means when your DNA strands are broken, that means that something in your body is not operating properly, that it's not operating at full capacity, that your immune system is degraded. There's other health effects that come along with that, and cancer just follows right along behind. Okay, so that's a basic premise of DNA damage. So when you talk about genetic damage, if you, let's say, you become infertile, and that you were talking about that, loss of sex drive, loss of sterility, virility, those things are affected by your hormones, which are genetic and which are structured through DNA. So if you have issues with infertility or sterility, then the likelihood that, a child that you do produce is going to have that same genetic structure in their DNA. So, I mean, some experts are saying that this is so bad that we're going to see a massive decline in the population over the next 25 or 30 years, because we're going to have a lot more infertility. We're going to have a lot more children born with all kinds of problems, if they're even able to function, if they don't, die in an event like a stillbirth or, like that, spontaneous abortion. So we're seeing all kinds of things, but I mean, it can range from everything. It can range from everything you can imagine when it comes to human health. So that's crucial. I mean, that's just a little tiny thing, right? I mean, that genetic change is both cellular and molecular. It changes the way our bodies function. And so then to move on from there, you mentioned behavioral changes. That's huge. We're seeing a lot of incidences in outrage and depression, anxiety disorders, attention deficit disorders. And then you couple that with the pharmaceutical drugs that psychologists typically give people who have a little bit of a mental irregularity in their life, whether it's temporary or not. They start dosing them with, psychotropic drugs that make everything worse. So that's why we're having all these shootings and stabbings and crazy things. And, So, and then on top of that, the EMFs have effect on the nervous system. So a lot of people are having issues with twitches and spasms, seizures. They're having aches and pains, arthritis, they're having feelings, weird feelings in their skin, crawling, pins and needles, their hair standing on end a lot, numbness in the extremities, things like that. So we're having nervous system problems. We're having impaired learning for children, so ADHD and all kinds of other memory loss, early Alzheimer's, all kinds of things. We talked about impaired fertility, depressed immune systems, hormonal disturbances. Sleep disorders are huge. I mean, more people are taking drugs for sleep disorders than anything, and they're hard to get off of. So you're looking at insomnia. You're looking at people who just can't sleep at all. You're looking at people who go to sleep and then can't stay asleep. They wake up, and even if they go back to sleep, they keep waking up. That'll mess you up right there, because that affects your immune system, and it affects all your hormones. One thing that a lot of people don't talk about, which is addressed in the Navy microwave document that I just posted on my website, is cardiovascular disease. And there are numerous issues with EMFs on the heart. And not just the heart, but all the tubes and blood vessels and other things inside of our bodies. But the heart, it can cause cardiovascular disease. So basically, it's causing the arteries to restrict blood flow. So they're like clamping down, they're closing up, they're getting hard. The heart muscles are literally, if you carry your phone in your front shirt pocket or in your bra, like God forbid, the lady I met yesterday had the phone in her bra, and I just want to reach out and grab it out of there. And but I couldn't because of the situation. But anyway, it is actually causing the heart muscle to deteriorate and become very weak. So we're having a lot more strokes and heart attacks. People are getting tinnitus. I always say that wrong. Tinnitus, ringing in the ears, buzzing in the ears. The ears are burning. Other noises, things like that. When they go to sleep, they can hear like whooshing sounds, and the things. Of course, cancer, diabetes, depression, premature aging, cancer, leukemia, particularly glioblastomas, which is basically what happened to my brother. And I'll just say this, I'll just tell people this story real quick. My brother was a very young, healthy man. He was in his early 50s. Actually, he was a little bit younger. He worked as a nurse his whole life. He trained baby docs, on nursing practices and protocol on the hospital floor. He did that for 35 years. I mean, he was a pro. Very healthy guy. Lived on a farm, lived in a clean environment, worked in the city. And he had a very long commute to work. And so he spent an awful lot of time in a high EMF environment, which is the hospital, where they're using all kinds of radio frequency equipment and, radio waves through the MRIs and other machinery, X-rays, things like that, right? And then he would often call people on his almost 2-hour drive home from work. Well, one day out of nowhere, my brother had a heart attack. I mean, he's like 48 years old, and he has a pretty good heart attack. And they put a stent in, and they're like, we don't understand. Everything looks great. We don't know why. He didn't have anything going on, really in there that would have indicated he had a heart problem. And all of us, everyone who knew him were just stunned. They were just like, wow, Pat had a heart attack. That's really hard to believe. And 3 years later, he was diagnosed with glioblastoma brain cancer. And glioblastoma used to be a very rare form of cancer. And it's often either in the brain or in the brain stem. And cancer does not run in my family. We don't have a genetic history of it. I don't ever know anyone who's ever had glioblastoma before. And suddenly here it is. And unfortunately, he lived exactly as long as the lifespan is for patients, the typical patient with a glioblastoma. He lived 18 months. And the tumor that they found in his head was precisely on the side of his head where he held his cell phone. And it took me a while to put this all together. And this is why I'm such an advocate now. Because this killed my brother, my oldest. I have two brothers, but this was my older brother and my oldest brother. And I can show you a picture of my brother in the hospital after he had the one and only tumor that he had initially, right there on the side of his head, right where the antenna of his phone was. And the heart attack that came before was an indication of the damage, the biological damage that those electromagnetic frequencies were having on his entire body, starting with his heart. So if you have heart problems and you have a cell phone, it's important that you do something about it. And even if you don't, it's important to do something about it before it happens to you.
If you have issues with your heart, you're saying you really don't have any business having one of those things near your body.
No, you really don't. If you have any kind of disability, if you have any kind of health issue, and that includes mental health issues, because we understand this affects the brain, the nervous system, and many other functions of a healthy brain. So if you are depressed, if you have epilepsy or any kind of seizures, if you're a diabetic, if you have heart issues, or, we could just go on and on. You really need to limit your exposure to electromagnetic frequencies, and not just from your cell phone. And that's the important thing that people need to understand. It's not just your cell phone. There are many, many other areas, devices,
smart meters, of course,
where you can get it from. Of
course you can. I'm genuinely distressed to hear about your brother, Jill. I'm sorry to hear that. What was his name, Jill?
His name was Patrick.
Excuse me, you said Patrick. Yeah, I was trying to write it. I didn't write it down when you said it. I'll have a glass of wine later on after work, and I'll raise a glass to Patrick.
Thank you.
He's somewhere. He's in a different realm now. I don't know where we end up, but maybe he's got some influence, Jill, on us and on you. And it's a really good reason to be talking about this and to be doing something about it. So raise a glass to Patrick, and I've no doubt that you're right. If the tumour was where it showed up on inside his head, on his brain. Now, you came on to talk about it because you believe that there are ways that we can mitigate the effects of this abomination, really, that's being rolled out around the world. And it's not just 5G, as you quite rightly say. It's smart meters, it's everything. What kind of steps can we take naturally to kind of mitigate the effects of it? I know you've got really interesting news on that.
Yeah, well, I think to start with, if we can't stop this, and it's looking less and less like, we're going to have as much success as we would like initially. Unfortunately, a lot of people are going to have to get sick and die before they actually come out and tell the truth about it, or they're forced to. But the number one thing you can do is, first focus on your phone, how much you use your phone, how you carry your phone, and what you do with it. So first of all, don't ever put the phone up to your head. Don't ever put it up against your body in any way. If you read the insert on your cell phone that came with your cell phone, buried in all the massive crap that they put in that little insert, they're going to tell you that you shouldn't really have your phone anywhere closer than an inch to your body. That means not putting it up against your head, not carrying it in your bra, not carrying it in your pocket, or anything like that, right? So the industry itself says that it's not safe to put it up against your body, right? It's a cell phone, and you see people do it all the time. So stop doing that. And the way to stop doing that primarily is to use the speaker function, first of all. The second way is to go get yourself some wireless, not wireless. I don't mean like, router wireless. I mean earbuds that do not have wires inside of the earpieces. These are called air tube earbuds, or they call them hollow earbuds. You can plug this into your phone, and it has, you can get ones with little microphones on them too. And the reason for not having the wires in the earbuds is that electricity travels along a conductive route, and wires are conductive. So basically all the EMFs that are coming off your phone and off the cell phone signal are running right up those wires and into your skull. So that's the number one thing you can do. The next thing you can do is limit your use of the phone. So limit your calls and your activity on those, on your smartphone. Limit them. Use only what's necessary. When you are using them, don't use them in areas where you're not getting a good cell signal, because what happens then is the signal in your phone and the Wi-Fi signal just get stronger in order to make that connection. So if you're in a place where you only have a few bars of connectivity, you're actually increasing your exposure to EMFs by the 100-fold. So limit those calls to areas where you get really good reception. Automobiles or moving things like the train or an elevator are notoriously dangerous because, again, the signal's trying to keep up with your cell phone location, and so it's amping up, it's magnifying its power, its signal strength to try to keep up with your movements. Plus, the metal cage that you're sitting in, that would be your phone, acts like a gigantic antenna which magnifies and bounces the signal around the inside of your vehicle where you're sitting. So the next thing you can do with your phone is, when you're not really actively using it, and I know there are so many people that are totally addicted to the bing, 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 and the Facebook and the social media alerts and notifications, right? Yeah. Everything goes bing, bing on your phone. It's like Pavlov's dog, responding to the stimuli of the sound of your phone. But you know what? It's time for us to get over this addiction. And it truly is an addiction, and they are recognizing that it is an addiction. So the best thing you can do in that respect is to wean yourself off of the bing bing and stop being a trained monk, a lab rat, and put your phone on airplane mode when you don't need it. So you can check your messages and your social media on regularly throughout the day, but do you really need it to bing bing at you all day long? I bet your employer doesn't really appreciate that. And it takes your concentration off of what you're doing. So put it on airplane mode. And when you turn it back on, all your stuff will be there, all your emails, all your notifications, everything will be there. And at the same time, in airplane mode, you can still use a lot of the apps. Like you can use your reminders, you can use your alarm, your like, everybody has like, a lot of people use them for like a wake up alarm. You can use it for all kinds of other things. You can even write text and do messaging in airplane mode. And then when you turn your phone back on, to regular Wi-Fi, then all those messages that you wrote and sent while you were in airplane mode get automatically sent to those applications. So you don't have to be live all the time. So wean yourself off of it and use it only when you have to. Then don't sleep with your phone at night. I mean, first of all...
Madness, Jill. It's madness, isn't it? It's madness to have that thing next to your pillow, under your pillow, or on the bloody bedside locker. What are people thinking? It's crazy.
It's part of the addiction, Richie. I mean, they did a study here in the U.S. even just a couple years ago, and they said, would you rather give up your cell phone or give up one of your arms or one of your legs? And a vast majority, like 80%, would rather give up an arm and a leg than their cell phone.
My God.
And that's really frightening. So do yourself a favor, and when you go to bed at night, if you need your phone for an alarm clock, then put it on airplane mode. The alarm clock will still work, okay? And then it's not sending and receiving all these pulses and signals at night while you're sleeping. Because the worst time to have that kind of frequency around your body is when you're sleeping, because when you sleep, your body is healing itself. It is building its immune system for the following day. It's fighting any kind of infectious, viruses or bacteria that you've gotten. It's trying to fight off disease. It's healing yourself. It's producing melatonin in the body, which helps you sleep. And all that is interrupted by EMFs. And, so do yourself a favor, put it on airplane mode if you need the alarm clock or whatever. Also, if you really, really need it in a case of emergency, like say, your kid's out on the town joyriding, or your mom or your grandparent is sick and, you might get that call in the middle of the night. The very least you can do is put the phone out in the hallway. Take it out of your sleeping space. You're still going to hear it out in the hallway, but just take it out of your immediate sleeping space, because your sleeping area should be your sanctuary. It should be your sanctuary, because that is when our bodies heal. And so that's really crucial. So those are just some things just with your phone. I mean, there's tons of ways to mitigate that extreme danger. And there are others, you can start by, looking for, like when you come into your home environment, or maybe even in your office environment, if you have any kind of control over that, You need to have a look at your computers. You need to have a look at your laptops. You need to have a look at any tablets that you use, Kindles, battery banks, a wireless mouse, a wireless keyboard, wireless speakers, wireless cameras, your router and your modem. You need to check all those for electromagnetic frequency radiation because they're all emitting it. Like, never ever put your laptop on your lap. Even that they call it a laptop, but it was never intended to put on your lap, because the bottom of your laptop is a huge EMF producer. You have a battery that's being charged, a very powerful battery, plus you have all these microprocessors and stuff that are at work. That's why your laptop gets hot, folks. That's the thermal radiation part of the microwave technology. And also, you probably noticed that your router modem, if you have a combo or just your router, your Wi-Fi router gets very hot. That's because it is blasting out some serious radio waves, some huge microwave frequencies. So the first thing you can do is turn off all the Wi-Fi in your house. Get rid of every wireless thing you have that you can possibly live without. That includes your Fitbits, your virtual reality, goggles, your Apple Watch, your wireless router, any wireless cameras that you have in the house, a walk-around phone, a wireless walk-around phone, which I was telling you is like a little mini cell tower.
Yeah.
That thing for the last already 10 years has been cranking out 60 gigahertz of electromagnetic radiation out of those DECT decked walk-around phones. And it almost killed me. Mine almost killed me. And that's a whole nother story. So you need to, especially with your router, turn your router off, connect your router to your computer with a shielded Ethernet cable. And if you don't know how to do that, just go online and, there's ways to do it. You might have to contact your wireless provider to have them help you permanently turn off the wireless on your router. I had to do that because there's not like a switch or a button to do it manually. So I actually had to go through my provider to do that. Let's see. All those things have electromagnetic fields. Can be very dangerous. I was going to say like Bluetooth earpieces.
Oh, these things.
Wireless headphones, the ones that you use to listen to music or whatever. Speakers, audio sunglasses. Now they have. You got to get rid of all that stuff. Your new digital smart TV is just emitting massive amounts of radiation at you while you're sitting there watching it. Anything that's like a mobile hotspot, anything like that. And then on top of that, you need to check your microwave oven. And here's how to do that.
Get rid of it. Come on. I mean, there's no better woman than you. I mean, you've written for years. Nobody better than you to tell people to cook for themselves.
Yeah.
Don't use a microwave.
I haven't had a microwave oven since I was in my parents' home. They're awful. I can't even be around them. They give me headaches. I should have known that years ago. Like when they first came out and we got one in our house. I remember I like to watch the popcorn pop, right? And I would sit there and look in the little window.
In the window, yeah.
Yeah, and then I would wonder why I had a headache by the time it was done popping. And I told my parents once, I said, that microwave, it just gives me a headache when I look into it. And they're like, oh, you're just crazy. That's ridiculous. But if you look at that little mesh that's in front of that's embedded in the glass on your microwave, well, that's an EMF shield. It's to protect you. But most people don't realize that microwave ovens are notorious for leaking microwave radiation outside of the box. So you really need to check it. And you can do that. There are little meters out there that you can buy, but please be very, very careful if you're going to buy any kind of a meter that either checks radio frequencies, electric frequencies, or electromagnetic radiation. So just be very, very cautious and do your homework if you're going to buy a meter. And most of the ones I've seen reviewed that you can use on your phone, which seems sort of dumb, really, to use your phone to detect wireless radiation. Yeah. But I haven't seen one yet that works, after it's been checked out by a real professional.
They seem like a gimmick, I think. I didn't, by the way, I'm not ignoring what you said about nearly being killed yourself. I'll ask you about that again in the near future. I didn't not mark that. Thanks for mentioning that. And thanks for sharing Patrick's story. I know that sounds very fake, me saying thanks for sharing.
No, it doesn't.
I know, because I mean it, because I think when it gets through to people like that, these are the facts. The companies themselves know. I talked to a guy many years ago when I was in Spain who worked for Nokia in Sweden or in Scandinavia. And he said, look, we knew that holding these things to your head was a bad idea. And you sharing Patrick's story and the tumour being right there in that exact position, it's important that people hear that, because it might give people a moment of pause. They might stop holding the phone to their head. Use the speaker function when they need to use the phone, as you quite rightly said. Let me just remind our listeners, because we've got about 2.5 minutes left. You can, of course, find Jill at hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com. But the blog, I had it here, Jill, and then I just bloody lost it because I'm an Egypt. An Egypt, by the way, is an Irish colloquialism for idiot. We say Egypt, and I can be an Egypt from time to time. Yeah, but Jill also blogs. Don't help me out here, Jill, because I've got it here.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's my blog is showmeoz.
That's the one. As in Ozarks.
.wordpress.com.
Yeah, showmeoz.wordpress.com. Lots of very, very important factual information there that you won't get anywhere else. And do check out Jill's book that she wrote with Dean, but her own books on the healing power of kitchen herbs, her book on the Ozarks, and the Garden Seed Saving Guide. For more information on those, go to hendersonlefthook.wordpress.com. You'll have the final word. Thanks for coming back, Jill. I really appreciate your time. Your time is valuable, and thanks for sharing it with us today. Final word to you. Loads of interest in this tonight on our Twitter feed, which you can see if you go there yourself later on. Final word, Jill, and again, sincere thanks.
Well, thank you, Richie. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We listen to your show all the time. It's great information, and I'm so glad that you're just still at it. And I'm wishing you all the best. And I would really encourage people to support you financially, because it's not cheap to do what you do. A lot of people work and put out this information just because it's their passion and it's an important thing to do. And so we have to support those people who provide us with this information. And you're definitely one of them, Richie. You are a big voice in Europe, and I'm always happy to be here. And I'm happy to help anybody. If they want to come to my blog, you're welcome to make a comment. I always write back. There's a contact form if you want to talk to me privately. I'm happy to help. Any information I can give you, anything you want to share, I'm always open to readers' input, and I love talking to folks. So thank you again for having me, and I hope I've helped some people understand the dangers of 5G a little bit better today.
You've done more than that, Jill. It's showmeoz.wordpress.com. Thanks for doing it. And I look forward to you coming on again real soon, Jill. Let's make this as regular as you have time for. I really appreciate that. And you've sold us the Ozarks, Jill. I wouldn't be surprised if the tourism board in the Ozarks is wondering where the hell are all these inquiries coming from holidays in the Ozarks later on. It's Jill Henderson, god damn it. It's Jill selling the Ozarks. Listen,
it's all my fault.
Fantastic. Look, much love to you and to Dean, and let's do it again soon. Thanks so much, Jill. Have a brilliant rest of your day. Cheers,
Thank
Jill.
you too, Richie.
Amazing. Jill Henderson live on the Richie Allen Show today for Tuesday, September 3rd. What a wonderful woman. Showmeoz.wordpress.com. Lovely of Jill to say that. Go on there. Any questions you have, you can communicate with Jill. She'll chat with you happily and readily. And I look forward to her coming back on the programme in the near future. Of course, Dean will be coming back real soon as we chat with Dean regularly. We're vastly running out of time, quickly running out of time. It's going to be an unbelievably hilarious evening, I think. It's all a theatre, it's all a puppet show. But the madness in Westminster this evening as opposition MPs attempt to take control of the business of the House so that tomorrow they can draft and then pass legislation that prevents Boris Johnson from leaving with no deal. It is a shit show, and though I have gotten so much wrong over the years, god damn it, my predictions are, well, they're hardly Nostradamus, right? But I called this one down to the letter, didn't I? How the Conservative Party would be destroyed and how Brexit would be destroyed. I take no joy in it whatsoever, but there you are. Massive thanks to the brilliant Jill Henderson, full of love, full of intelligence and knowledge. Great to have Jill on. And Mark Collett earlier on. Great to chat even with Mark again, the nationalist commentator and broadcaster. Loved having him on as well. That's it for the programme. I'll be back tomorrow with more Wednesday at 5 p.m. UK time, leaving you with Depeche Mode. Bye now.